Ow! Woo, woo, woo. What's going on, TFA fam? It is the host with the most, Cody Kutzer. You can find me on Twitter at CKutzerFF. Joined, as always, by the TFA OG himself, the man of steel. That is Kevin Steele. You can find him on Twitter at FantasyRad13. Tonight we're going to be talking about our top 12 receivers. Just kind of going to be banging out the rest of our rankings here. Obviously, already did quarterback, tight end. We did running backs last week, so definitely be sure to go back and check those out. But before we get into it, Kev, what's going on, man? How you doing?
It's going good. Going good. You know, I had a nice little weekend. You know, now we got a 4-day weekend, a 4-day week before a nice 3-day weekend with 4th of July this weekend. So it's going good. I mean, we are so close. We're getting close to football. Next Monday is the start of SFB 10. So, I mean, there's a lot to be excited about right now in the fantasy streets. So.
Yeah, man. You have any 4th of July plans? You're going to be doing anything?
Not yet. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. So I don't know. It's still TBD right now on what the plan is. So might be on the old YouTube cutting up some videos, you know, because the grind never stops, if you will.
Yeah, you gotta fill all those places to fill the content. We got the written content popping back up on the site. Got the Instagram popping. We got the Facebook, the Twitter, the YouTube, the TikTok. Got a little TikTok action for all of our. Listen, I thought like TikTok was just gonna be a bunch of like 13-year-old kids, and literally every time I just like go to scroll, it's like 30-year-old women just on there, just shaking the goods,
like shaking what their mama gave them.
Like how did that change so quick? So if you are on TikTok, throw us a follow over there. I have a couple of ideas up my sleeve, a couple good ones. So at least I think so anyway. So definitely be sure to give us a follow. And if you've been one of those people, it's like, oh, I'm never gonna get a Facebook. I'm never gonna get a Twitter. I'm sure as hell not getting a TikTok. Just give it a chance. It's pretty good. It definitely take up some time, and you can get down some rabbit holes with that. And before you know it, you've been just scrolling through videos for an hour and a half, and you have no idea what just happened.
Oh, for sure. I've lost like hours of time. I'm like, okay, put the phone down. I gotta walk away because like the next thing you know, it's like, oh, I thought I've been watching this for 10 minutes, and here I am. 3 hours have gone by. So yeah, it's been wild. So yeah, TikTok is a fun place. Also, you can check out the content over on YouTube. We've been doing a lot of smaller videos, cutting them up. We just did an Austin Eckler one. We also have Derrick Henry that we just did. So you can check all that out. But I think that people came here to listen to our takes, not our promotional stuff, right?
I mean, nah, you're right. But real quick, our question of the week, since we're going strong with the brand of hashtag nuts on the table, our question of the week, let us know. Like I said, we're going to be going over our top 12 receivers. Give us your hashtag nuts on the table take of who you think is going to be a wide receiver one that no one is talking about currently. So use that hashtag, tag us on Twitter, drop it in the comments, leave a rate and review, all that stuff. That's got the idea from Robbie Jeffries to start keeping track of all this and like look back at it at the end of the year. So I definitely want to start doing that every time we throw out a hashtag nuts on the table take. So without further ado, here are our top 12 wide receivers for the 2020 season. I love it. So I will kick things off here. Our consensus 101. I mean, yeah, I guess he's our consensus one. I have him at 1. You have him at 2, and that is 1 Michael Thomas. Really don't need to go into too much here, man. He's one of the receivers I see. There's only like maybe 3 or 4 that have the target upside that he has, and to go along with that target upside, he also has one of the most accurate and consistent quarterback. So even if Breeze isn't going to be slinging it as much, he can still get 150, 60 targets, and he's going to catch 110, 120 of them. So I think there are few receivers and few players in fantasy, for that matter, that have the high floor and the high ceiling that he gives you on a week to week basis, and that's not gonna stop any time. With this year, with the addition of Manny Sanders and drafting the tight end from Dayton, whose name is escaping my mind right now.
Troutman.
Yes, Mr. Adam Troutman. So for me, like I said, we really don't have to go too much further into Michael Thomas.
All right, well let's just jump over to the next one. Let's start with Davante Adams, who's my wide receiver 1 in this. So for me, I think it's pretty easy. I do think that Emmanuel Sanders' presence is going to chip into a little bit of Michael Thomas's workload. But for me, I think that when I look at Davante Adams, Davante Adams is an absolute stud, right? So you look at him; he averaged 10.6 targets per game last year. He was one of very few wide receivers that had a 30% target share, which was third best in the league. Was targeted on 29% of his routes, or of all of the team's routes. Excuse me. So that makes sense. Which was, I think, second most in the league. He averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game. He did miss some time last year, but he still had 82 receptions, 997 yards, 5 touchdowns. He was also third in red zone receptions. Also led the league with 45% target rate in the red zone. He was 12th in yards after the catch. Some things that I do like about him, they had a no target competition in Green Bay, right? So it's still him and just him. I mean, you have Alan Lazard, which I know you're a fan of. They still have Marcus Valdez-Scantling. Equinemius St. Brown is still there, but it's really just him. And so he is still going to command a heavy workload. He was seventh, and he has the seventh most PPR points per game since 2014. He's also the only 4 receivers last year saw at least 20% of their team targets in over 90% of their games. Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, and Davante Adams was the other. And he was also 4th in slot yards per route run. So there's a lot to like with Davante Adams. I think that he could come in and command probably somewhere in the range of 160 to 170 targets this year in this offense. And so I think the floor is certainly there and the ceiling is 100% there. I think you see an uptick in touchdowns. I think he probably comes back to and hits that double-digit, touchdown number. So I prefer Davante Adams to Michael Thomas, but I think you could go either way with that.
Yeah, man, to be honest, we're not going to have too much discussion here with our top, 3, 4, 5 guys. Adams, Michael Thomas, I really, that might be a thing where if I'm in multiple leagues and I'm facing that decision at, multiple spots for whatever reason, if I have one of those 104, 108 kind of picks, depending on how all that falls, I might just flip-flop between the two. You know what I mean? Like I like Adams, and I put the tweet out on our Twitter at @FF_authority. And I really think that we're looking at 4 players who have a legitimate shot at wide receiver 1 overall. Not like an outside, not like a hot take. But, I mean, basically we're looking at Michael Thomas, Davante Adams, Tyreek, and Julio. Right? Like, do you feel like those are the 4 who you feel have the best shot to finish as the number 1 receiver? Is there anybody outside of those 4 that come to mind right off the top of your head who you think have a true legitimate shot?
I think there are a couple that do. A couple other than that, I think that you could probably make a case for Allen Robinson, which I know is hot because a lot of people are a little bit lower on him, but I definitely think that he has that in his range of outcomes in this offense, especially one that was as bad as it was. For him to be as productive as he was last year in such a bad offense, I think that he can take a step forward, especially with the likelihood of Nick Foles, which we'll talk a little bit more about him in a little bit. But I think he has that upside, and I think Chris Godwin has that upside. I think he could hit that as well. So I think those would be the 2 guys that I would probably. And possibly, I guess, Odell. I do think Odell still has that in him. I know we haven't seen it in a while from him, and I know for most people, again, he's another guy we'll have so I don't want to get too far into it because we got a battle coming up with him and Odell, or with Odell, because I am much higher on him than you. But I think he has that in his range of outcomes as well.
Yeah, so point being, there's still very few. With these top couple of guys, you can, put, like I always say, put their names in a bag, pull one out, I'm going to be fine with them.
I think I would put it like this. I think those 4 you mentioned probably have, somewhere in the range of 40 to 50% likelihood of it being one of them. And then I think these other guys that I just mentioned are probably more in that 10 to 15% range. Like it's a little bit more unlikely.
Right, right. So moving on here, our number 3 is going to be Julio Jones. Again, another guy who really doesn't need too much discussion here. If you look at what he's done over the past several seasons, I mean, the dude's just been a straight up monster. The touchdowns haven't always been there. The week to week consistency is also something you could question. But if you go back all the way back to 2014, he has had basically 1,400 receiving yards every single year. He just missed that by 6 yards last year. I mean, you're looking at over the past 3 years, 148, 170, 157 targets. Like I said, the thing that's holding him back from that wide receiver one upside has just basically been the touchdowns, right? For whatever reason, he's just not being targeted in, especially at the goal line within the 5, within 10, as what you would think he would be, especially with how talented he is. But he's still going to get his. This is an offense that we love this year. Even if Calvin really takes a step forward, which we're all banking on, really hasn't had 100 targets yet in his career. I think we're all banking on the fact that he's going to get up to that 120, 130, possibly even 140 range. But they're missing 200 plus targets in this offense. So is Julio going to get to the 190, 200 where he used to be? No, he's not. But I really don't think that he has to be to pay off his draft price. If you're looking at where he's going right now, he's going at 201 as a wide receiver 4 overall, according to Fantasy Football Calculator. Like I said, he is R3. He is Fantasy Pros consensus 4. So we're right in line with those guys. Just he's one of my favorite targets this year, and I know that this gets tossed around a lot, and I don't like this as far as like analysis, but if this is the year he gets those double-digit touchdowns, which again you can't bank on. He's only had double-digit touchdowns twice in his career, and that was back in 2012. Every year since then has been like 8 and 6. But if this happens to be the year that he goes for 10, 12, 13 touchdowns, something like that, we could be looking at a wide receiver 1 overall season from Julio. And he, like I said, he's someone who I absolutely love this year, and just that offense in general.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a stud. I mean, I don't need to add anything else into that. So he's been one of my favorite wide receivers over the last 10 years. Like, I just absolutely love Julio.
He's so much fun to watch.
Yeah, he's an absolute monster. So, anyways, all right. So let's jump to number 4. It's Tyreek Hill. No surprise. Now, he is much more volatile, right? I mean, last year he played in 12 games, did have that shoulder injury. I believe, it was week 1 against the Jags. But he averaged 7 targets per game, 22% target share, 58 receptions, 860 yards, 7 touchdowns. He averaged 14.8 yards per reception, 15.7 fantasy points per game. Now, the biggest problem with him, I think, for most people is always going to be the fact of how volatile he really is. Because he is going to absolutely fucking win you some weeks where he's going to get you 6, he might win you 3 or 4, just absolutely outright win you weeks, where he's going to drop you 35, 40 points. Because that's the type of receiver that he is. I mean, if you look over his career, for him, so since entering the league, Tyreek has been targeted 96 times on passes 20 yards down the field and has hauled in 48 of them, which is the second most over that time span. Only has 1 drop. And then from there, like I said, if you look at him, he had 4 wide receiver 1 weeks last year, 2 wide receiver 2 weeks, 2 wide receiver 3 weeks, and 4 unusable weeks. Where in his unusable weeks, like he's like wide receiver 80 or wide receiver 90 for that week, where he might get you like 1 point or something like that. But I think that, with Pat Mahomes and the offense and everything else, like he has that wide receiver 1 upside in him, or the wide receiver 1 upside in him because of how explosive he is. He's the most explosive player in the league. Get the ball in his hands. He's a threat to score anytime he has the ball in his hands. However, you have to ask yourself, are you okay or comfortable with how volatile he is as a wide receiver? Because he is going to give you those weeks where he's absolutely going to cost you a week, but he's also going to win you those weeks. So I think this may not be the year, but I think because they're so overloaded with targets, with Kelsey, with McCole Hardman, with Demarcus Robinson, Sammy Watkins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There's so many targets to go around, but the good thing about him is that he's not a player who lives off volume, right? So he's never somebody that's needed a high target share to be able to succeed. And so with all those things considered, I still feel very comfortable taking him there, but you're just going to have to ask yourself, are you comfortable with some of that volatility that he brings?
And truthfully, for me, just as an aside before we move on to our next guy, who's Chris Godwin, I don't mind having those volatile guys, but I'm not going to have an entire roster of them, right? Like that's something super easy that you can balance out in your drafts by getting someone who's a little on the safer side, who's going to provide you. Maybe they don't have the ceiling that Tyreek has, but you're counting on them to get you that 12 to 15 points per week. So you can definitely balance that out. And if, like you said, if he has one of the, like he has several weeks like that every single year where he is the sole reason why you won that week, right? So that's something that I personally don't mind. And I think you need guys like that. And like you said, it's just going to come down to, do you want to pay the price that he's going at for how volatile he can be? And I think that that juice is definitely worth the squeeze. So moving on to, like I said, our number 5, who is Chris Godwin, has the ADP of 2.06, wide receiver 6 overall over at Fantasy Football Calculator, and the 6 consensus wide receiver over on Fantasy Pros. He seems to be someone who's getting like a little bit of, everyone's trying to poke holes and trying to question because of, we don't know what Tom Brady's going to be like, and is Tom Brady the guy that he was, and he's getting old and 40 and blah, 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 all that. To me, if you look at, so Godwin had 119 targets last year, but he was 41st in catchable targets. I mean, I think we can bank on Brady improving that. So even if Godwin doesn't end up going up to 140, 150 targets, if he stays around that 120 to 130, but now his targets are more efficient, that's that's going to easily be able to balance and counteract each other out there. I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't be counting on, the 120 to 130 range. Because if as excited as we are about that offense, that receiver depth chart is slim. And if anything happens to either Godwin or Evans, that other guy I think is going to completely explode, because I think either of those guys can function as like the true alpha in that offense. And just something else to note with Brady's, everyone's, can he throw deep, and the arm talent, is he falling off and everything like that. Godwin was 23rd in deep targets last year, and he was only averaging 1.5 a game. So that's not going to be something that's going to completely throw off his fantasy production, and taking him where he's going is completely fine by me. And I'm not scared off of the Brady, kind of the cliff coming, so to speak, narrative at all with him.
Oh, I'm not either. I absolutely love Chris Godwin. We were ahead of the field last year with him, and I'm not scared off him at all. So, yeah, I totally agree there on that one. So let's go to the next one, which is probably a little bit controversial. Now, I don't know if it is or not, but we definitely have him higher than consensus. But we have Allen Robinson at 6, where he is going 312, which is ridiculous to me that's how low he's going. That seems way too low for him, but he's also, wide receiver 13, but his Fantasy Pros consensus is wide receiver 8. So we are ahead of there as well. Look, the dude has been gifted, or I shouldn't say be gifted, or maybe cursed with the worst quarterbacks you could possibly imagine, right? Even going back to his college days, where it was Hackenberg and I can't think of it. What was the other Penn State bum? Played for the Raiders. What was his name?
Whoa. Let's pump the brakes there. Christian Hackenberg and Matt McGloin.
There it is.
Will always be Penn State studs.
Okay, you're a Penn State guy. I think you're wearing a Penn State hat right now. So, and shirt. Okay. So, anyways, so he had those, and then he gets to come to the league and he gets fucking Blake goddamn Bortles, right? And then from there, he gets to go to Chicago, where he gets Mitchell Trubisky, and then he gets also Chase Daniel. So like the dude has just had the stone cold worst quarterbacks, and he still produced, right? So you look at him last year, which he never should have. That offense was so bad last year. However, he averaged 9.6 targets per week, 8th in deep targets, 27% target share, 15.9 fantasy points per game. 98 receptions, 1,147 yards, 7 touchdowns, 6th in completed air yards, 5th in contested catch rate, 6th in total target distance. He also had 41% of his snaps came from the targets. Yes, please. That is what we're looking for. That is what I want. There is nothing that scares me off him for this year because who is the competition, right? It's Anthony Miller and Ted Ginn, who's like 35, 36 years old. There's just no target competition. They have no tight end. Yes, they drafted Cole Kmet, and they also added Jimmy Graham, who's completely washed. So I'm not worried about that either. So when I look at all those things combined, like Allen Robinson has the safest floor in my opinion and has a very high ceiling. You are going to be hard pressed to find somebody that has his type of target share. The 27% target share was fantastic. He also he had 5 wide receiver 1 weeks, 5 wide receiver 2 weeks, 1 wide receiver 3 week. So for me, I love Allen Robinson. I've always loved Allen Robinson. I remember going back, shout out to like last year, shout out to Anthony last year, going back and forth, and Anthony was like, Allen Robinson's a bum. Allen, he was definitely wrong on that, right? But love Anthony, but I'm going to say that was a bad take. However, with Allen Robinson, right, it's just the dude has always a little bit underrated. Like last year, he was going like 6th, 7th round or something absolutely ridiculous in drafts last year, and he absolutely smashed that. And now he's going at 312, which to me is still too low for him. I would have thought he would have been going like at least early 3rd, but 312. If I can get him late 3rd, early 4th, sign me up all day.
Yeah, for sure. We were on him last year, even with his increased price this year. We were definitely on him again. I mentioned the catchable targets for Chris Godwin. Allen Robinson's was even worse. He was 56th in catchable target rate, and he was 63rd in target accuracy. So, TFA's own Jen Smith jumped in the mentions whenever we put out the tweet about there will be no Allen Robinson slander in the TFA household, and she was saying that you're banking on Foles or you think Trubisky's going to take a huge step forward, and we both had the same response of like, we do think it's going to be Foles at some point. You think it's going to be the beginning of the year. I think it's going to be at some point. It's just a matter of when, not if. But he doesn't need to have a huge bump to be able to pay off, a wide receiver 6 overall. I think he was I want to say he was 12 points away from wide receiver 6 last year, and I think 20 points away from wide receiver 5 last year in half PPR scoring. So it's not going to take a lot for him to be able to pay this off. And if he's going to be going in that mid to late 3rd round, sign me up. That was nice. We had some nice time with that 1 to 6, but we're going to start getting some disagreements here, and it's going to kick us off with a guy that we have been talking about. It seems like all off season. It started with the big free agency show that we had back in, what was that, March, I guess, whenever we had 6 of us on the pod, and that was just a hashtag blasty blast, as they say. But we're going to return to a DeAndre Hopkins, who is 7th overall in our consensus rankings. I have him at 5. You have him at 9. Why don't you go ahead and you can start off and just say your piece. Like I said, we've beat this a lot so far, but just summarize why you are lower on him and you have him at 9. Like I said, I have him at 5. He is going as wide receiver 5 in both ADP and the Fantasy Pros consensus rank. So you were definitely lower on him than the majority.
I'm certainly am, and I hashtag nuts on the table feel strong about this as well. This is one of those things that I will not back off of this year. I do think that DeAndre Hopkins is going to lose targets, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why. He averaged 10 targets per game last year, 30% target share. That ain't happening this year. I can almost guarantee you he's not going to come anywhere close to that. I think it's more in line of 22 to 24% target share. That's where I think he's going to come in. That's a large amount of targets to lose. He had 104 receptions last year, which was second most, 1,165 yards. He was 11th in completed air yards, 7th in red zone receptions with 7 touchdowns, and he averaged 17.8 fantasy points per game. Now, if you look at the roster last year for the Texans, Will Fuller missed a huge chunk of time last year, and who else was there? It was Kenny Stills who didn't really do anything. Kiki Kuti. I mean, there was absolutely nobody there. So he was always the main target. However, now you move into Arizona, and I think this is where things are going to change. One, you start looking at this. The Cardinals are certainly committed to the run, right? Over the final 3 weeks of the season, the Cardinals went from 24 rush attempts per game to 30. They won 2 of those 3 games. The Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald are still there. Both of them commanded 100 targets apiece. I don't think those are going to drop off dramatically. So where are all these other targets going to come from for DeAndre Hopkins to get his 150, 160 targets? Because he is not somebody, at least that was used heavily as a deep threat. If you look at him, 97 of his 104 receptions were 20 yards or less, which was the 3rd highest rate in the league. So he is somebody that eats on, that's at least how he was deployed in Houston, was somebody that was utilized as a short and intermediate route, right? The dude can catch anything. I love DeAndre Hopkins' a talent, but my problem is his volume. I don't think it's going to be there for him to hit that. I still think that he has a really strong floor, but I don't think he has the type of ceiling that we're looking for. Kyler only threw 542 pass attempts last year in 2019. I don't know how many more of those you can expect for him to get. Who is he taking targets from? Larry Fitzgerald, I still think, gets 80 to 90 targets. I think that you look at somebody like Christian Kirk, who's probably going to get around 100, 110. They still have guys there like Keyshawn Johnson and Andy Isabella. Kenyon Drake's going to get some. So some of those guys are going to get some. Not enough that's like it's going to affect DeAndre Hopkins, of course. But I just don't think that he's going to see that type of volume. That is my biggest problem with him. The Cardinals want to run the football. They're a team that want to establish the run. They are a team #establish the run. And so with all those things considered, I just think that you are baking into where he is going. You are taking his absolute ceiling, and I think that's a problem. I don't think he's going to hit it. I think he's much more likely to come much further down than that. And so that's why I have him at where I do.
I get what you're saying, but I also think the fact of like the rushing toward the end of the year, I think that was more of a case of Cliff going with what they had versus what he wants, right? Like I think we all believe that we're going to see the offense at least progress a little bit more to what we thought we were getting with Cliff. Last year, if you look at it, Arizona was 18th in pass attempts. Houston was 20th. I think we can easily see Kyler go over 600 passing attempts. I mean, we had 9 teams in the NFL last year who did that. I don't see why Kyler could not be there this year. I think the reason, like I said, why we saw it was the fact of like who was Kyler going to be throwing to last year. So I definitely think that's a case where is he going to be getting the 160, 170 targets that he was getting in years past? No, I completely agree with you there. But I do think he can thrive as an efficient receiver. And I don't think the targets and the target share is that big of a deal. If we look at 2019, the top 12 receivers from weeks 1 to 16 averaged 133.5 targets. Michael Thomas was the only receiver last year with over 150, he was the only one from weeks 1 to 16 that had over 150 targets. D-Hop sat at 150 on the nose, and we had 6 wide receivers who were at or above that 25% market share threshold. And if you go back 3 years, that number goes up. But I think that's more of a trend of what we're going to see going forward. I don't think we're going to see the 200 target A, B, and Julio years anymore. I think our wide receiver ones for fantasy purposes are going to be living in that 140 to 160, occasionally like 170, 180 kind of guy. 2018, we had 8 receivers that were at or above 25%. In 2017, that was 9. So like I said, I think that's a trend. I don't think it's going to continue just to keep going down, but I don't think we need to have guys who are at that, 29, 30, 33%. Do we want that? Absolutely. but I don't think that's going to be a prerequisite for wide receiver one seasons going forward. But I do agree with you on the targets aren't going to be there, and I do agree with you on the point of at wide receiver 5, like that's kind of his ceiling, right? I don't think we see him crack too much further into there unless he has some absurd kind of touchdown variability, and we've touched on that before. But the dude's a monster. I think we see that the Cliff Kingsbury offense progress. I don't think it's going to be a case of Kenyon Drake is just going to, and that running game is just going to completely go by the wayside. But I do think we see those attempts come down. I think we see the pass attempts go up. So if he's sitting at that 22%, like you were saying, 22 to 25, I think he'll be able to, because he was wide receiver 3 last year, if I'm not mistaken, in half PPR scoring, like I said, from weeks 1 to 16. So I think that's something where he's not going to fall too much further from that. And if we believe that Kyler Murray is the truth, like I think both of us believe that he is, I think that he'll be able to get a wide. I can't even remember where Kirk or Fitz came in last year in terms of their fantasy finish, but none of them were, I think, even sniffed like wide receiver 2. Maybe Fitz did. So I think we see this year with D-Hop giving us a wide receiver 1 season. But like I said, I do agree that the wide receiver 5 is kind of his ceiling, and the targets aren't going to be what they were before. But the fact that he was the only one in that offense last year, because if you look back to 2016 when Will Fuller was drafted, they have 41 games together and 21 games where it was just D-Hop. And his numbers are fairly similar. PPR points, he averaged about 1 more point per game without Fuller on the field. His receptions obviously go up a little bit, the yards and everything, but it's not a massive discrepancy between the two. So I think the fact of Kirk and Fitz and whoever else they're going to throw in. By the way, your boy Dan Arnold, Max Williams is projected the starter right now, so I'm gonna throw salt in that wound while we're at it.
Yeah, he's the blocking tight end. I mean, yeah, that's fine. That's what he's going to be. But the pass catching tight end is Dan Arnold, and Dan Arnold's absolutely. Don't even get me started on Dan. Dan Arnold's absolutely free. This is Dan Arnold breakout season, boys. I'm ready for it.
But I think that more or less sums up both of our. Did you have anything else you want to throw on there, or do you want to move on?
No, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's my biggest issue with DeAndre Hopkins. I love the player, and I think that if he was going a little bit later, that I would feel a little bit more comfortable with it. But I just don't like the volume that I see here that I'm projecting for this Cardinals offense, this passing offense, the 4 wide receiver sets, which is a big thing we talked about as well, which predicates spreading the ball around. And I think with all those things considered, I just don't think DeAndre Hopkins comes close to that 30% target share or 104 receptions. So if that's not happening, he's going to have to live off off touchdowns, and that is one of the most volatile stats to try to predict. So I try to follow the opportunity, and I try to follow the volume, and I just don't think it's going to be there as much as it has been in years past. So that's where I went with him. So I say all that. Then let's go ahead and jump over to Adam Thielen, who is wide receiver 8. Now, this is one we are relatively close on. I have him wide receiver 8. I think you have him wide receiver 10. Not a huge discrepancy here. I can kind of see the pros and the cons for him, but for me, I look at him. He only played 10 games last year. He was obviously hurt, got hurt last year. He only had 48 targets, 11 deep targets, 17% target share, 11.4 fantasy points per game. But like I said, he was hurt for most of last year. Now, everything we know Stephon Diggs is gone. They went and drafted my boy, Justin Jefferson, who I think is probably, again, I still think has the clearest path to targets of any rookie wide receiver, but this isn't about Justin Jefferson. So some obvious issues that I think that we should probably look at first is one issue that could pose a threat to Thielen's ceiling could be the level that they run the ball. The Vikings receivers touched the ball 147 times last year in 2019, or 18.5%, which ranked 29th in the league. And Thielen also played less in the slot last year, 29% compared to 2018, where he played 46% of the snaps. Now, we factor in, now that they just added Justin Jefferson last year played primarily in the slot at LSU. I know he really thrived there, but I think they're going to have to move him outside because I don't think they completely move Adam Thielen away from that. I think they both split time in the slot. I think Adam Thielen, we know that he has the rapport here with Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins loves to nickel and dime down the field. He is somebody that is risk averse and does not like to throw the deep ball. And so Adam Thielen, I think, gets much closer to that 26% target share that he saw in 2018, where he was an absolute monster, where he had almost 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 19.1 fantasy points per game. The writing's on the wall. Now, like I said, I do think they're going to have to throw the ball more this year, and that's something that we've kind of talked about. We've talked about Justin Jefferson, that I think that we're going to see a little bit more volume here in this passing offense because of the fact that I think their defense is going to take a step backwards, and I think that's going to cause them to have to throw the ball a little bit more. Now, if Dalvin Cook sits out, that could also have something to do with it. So all those things considered, Adam Thielen is in one of those rare positions where there's really not much target competition outside of the fact that he has Justin Jefferson. Now, people will bitch it that last year they ran 12 personnel and 35% of the time last year. I think some of that had to do with the fact that once Adam Thielen went down, that's when a lot of it started happening. That's when you see Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith be used a lot more because they really had nobody else. It was Olabisi Johnson and Laquan Treadwell, so they had to use 12 personnel a little bit more. Even if they do, I'm still okay with it. Adam Thielen's going to absolutely eat in terms of targets, and I think, like I said, I think he comes much closer to that 26% target share that he saw in 2018. So that's why I have him where I have him. I don't think he has a massive ceiling. I don't think he's somebody that you can project. You think that he's going to finish like wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4, but I feel really confident that falling into that wide receiver 7 to 10 range, I feel really great about that, especially in PPR and half-point PPR formats.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not going to add too much more here so we can move on to our next debate. But like you said, the main thing is if you look at last year, they were 6th in the NFL in terms of offensive snaps with a lead. Like you said, that defense is starting to fall apart. They're not what they used to be, so they're going to have to throw more. That's obviously going to play into Thielen's hand. Outside of Thielen, it's the tight ends. Obviously, Justin Jefferson is the new addition. The running backs are going to be involved as well, but I think it's easily Adam Thielen leading that receiving group. His price is starting to come up a little bit from where it was whenever we were talking about some guys we liked as early values. 304 wide receiver 9 according to Fantasy Football Calculator, but still just wide receiver 14 in the Fantasy Pros consensus. And then over on Best Ball 10s, he's wide receiver 15. So between the Fantasy Pros consensus and the Best Ball 10s, he's obviously still a value there because we obviously have him higher at this point. But he's definitely someone who, like we were talking about earlier, you would love to pair a Thielen with somebody like a Tyreek Hill so you can balance out that volatility in your draft strategy and in your roster and looking at your week-to-week scoring. But let's move on to number 9 in our consensus top 12, and that is Kenny Golladay. Now, I will lead by saying this. With these ranks, I had to hashtag put my nuts on the table, and Kenny Golladay was just more or less the sacrificial lamb, for lack of a better term. I had to move somebody down, and it was Kenny G. I probably, like I said, I should have him ranked higher, but there were some guys I wanted to get in my top 12 who I've been banging the table for all off season. Like I said, Kenny G was just the one who kind of fell. If you look at what he has been doing over the past couple years, he's been super consistent. Obviously, last year he had to deal with Stafford going down, but I guess my big thing with him is I'm not sure how much more he can progress in terms of what he's done over the past couple seasons, right? Look at 2018, 70 catches, over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. Last year, the touchdown total really came up, went up to 11, and he went 65 for 1190. Now, again, that was only with, I think it was 8 or 9 weeks with Stafford, and then he had bums the rest of the season. But I love Marvin Jones this year. That defense, I think, is still going to be a question mark. So, the targets are still going to be there, but I think we could see more of a 1A, 1B kind of split between Golladay and Jones. And I do foresee TJ Hawkinson, if he is fully healthy, taking that next step. He obviously had that first game of the year, and everyone was celebrating, especially all the guys who had TJ Hawkinson as their number 1 overall dynasty tight end. And then through the rest of the year, he just completely fell off, and we literally forgot who he was by the end of the year. But I do foresee him taking that step forward. Obviously, the addition of DeAndre Swift, I think he's a perfect fit for if they want to use a workhorse back. I don't think Kerryon Johnson's going to be it. But anyway, we're not talking about that. The offense as a whole. Like I said, the guys that I have above him, I don't think whenever you're drafting, you're going to have to make the decision of, do I take Golladay or somebody like I have DK Metcalf and Tyler Boyd ahead of him. You're going to be able to draft both. That's not a situation where you're going to have to choose between the two. But like I said, that was my hashtag nuts on the table take. Those are two guys I've been pounding the table for. So Golladay was the one who had to suffer from my Waka Flocka Flames.
Well, let me go ahead and just throw a fucking bucket of water on why you're wrong there, because like, if all the players you could have moved out, like, we're going to be talking about some Tyler Boyd, okay? And you know, hashtag, or not hashtag, but a little preview, he has him at wide receiver 12, which is fucking ridiculous. And we'll get into that. I have him at wide receiver like 30, okay? I think that is much more in line with where he should be going. But we'll talk about that later. That's another conversation for another day. Let's talk about Kenny Golladay. The dude last year balled with David fucking Blau, which I didn't even know what a David Blau was whenever he went to start.
He's a baller.
I remember that from DFS, like having to like really like who? Like, I'm pretty confident in like knowing most teams' backup quarterbacks were. And when they said David Blau, I'm like, what? Like, but anyways, and he also had Jeff Driscoll last year for a lot of the year throwing on the ball. Matt Stafford had that traverse process, which it's not a big deal. We've seen other quarterbacks have it. It's not really that big of a deal. With all those things said, you give me a full year with Matt Stafford, who was absolutely balling last year. Yes, give me all of the Kenny Golladay. He averaged 7 targets per game, 21% target share. He was number 1 in deep targets last year. 18.3 yard per reception was 4th. He was 6th in yards per target, 7th in contested catch rate. He was 11th in fantasy points per target. He was 5th in air yards and his 15.1 average depth of target. And he was 3rd in catches of 30-plus yards with 11. The dude is a monster. I think he's only getting better. The one crazy thing is, I will say, is he's already 26 years old. He's almost 27. I think by the end of the year he'll be 27. He is an older prospect. It doesn't feel like he's been in the league for that long, which he really hasn't been. But he came into the league much older. But with all those things considered, like I said, with a full year of Matt Stafford, I really love Kenny Golladay. But I'll also say this. I'll say this to say that Marvin Jones is criminally undervalued, because like he averages with Matt Stafford on the field, like I think it's like 1.5 fantasy points per game less than what Kenny Golladay does, and
Right.
Marvin Jones is going in the 9th round. So if you wanted to pass up on Kenny Golladay and just hammer Marvin Jones, I wouldn't hate that either, because I think Marvin Jones is criminally undervalued as well. But like I said, with all things considered, he was first in receiving yards on contested catch rates, ahead of Devontae Parker, Mike Williams, and Julio Jones. And like I said, David Blau and Jeff Driscoll. So that is my biggest, he was able to do that last year with guys like that. I think his ceiling, I don't think, is substantially higher than what that is. I think that he's somebody that you could probably, see 1,400 yards with as explosive as he is of a downfield threat with Matt Stafford there. I don't think the touchdown numbers, which is crazy to see 11 touchdowns led the league last year. Like, we typically see, 15, 16 touchdowns, something like that. But I still think that he can come in somewhere between that 8 to 10 range of touchdowns. So I like him as a solid wide receiver 1 value, and I have no problem with, like I said, I think I have a wide receiver 9, I believe. So I think that is fair value for him. And like I said, I think on a week-to-week basis, I think he's somebody that you can really count on.
I literally can't even disagree with anything you said. Like I said, man, I couldn't in my heart of hearts talk about guys like Boyd and Metcalf this entire offseason and then not have the cojones to put them in the top 12. And Golladay was just the odd man out at that point. But the dude's a baller. If Stafford stays healthy this entire year, he's absolutely going to finish above where I have him. Like I said, it was just a case of getting my guys in the top 12 just to, so I didn't back down from my takes. But we are going to move on to Calvin Ridley, who is our wide receiver 10. Has an ADP of 405, wide receiver 16 at Fantasy Football Calculator. and at 17 over on the consensus ranks. I was surprised to see, with as much hype as he's been getting, that his consensus rank of Fantasy Pros was at 17. But we've been talking about him enough. We don't have to dive into him too deep. But it's, like I said, same thing we touched on with Julio. 200 plus targets gone in that offense. Calvin Ridley has yet to go over 90. I mean, to go over 100 rather. I think he said like 92 and 93 over the past 2 years. This will absolutely be the year that he approaches that 120, 130 range. And I love this offense as a whole. And I think this is setting up as the Calvin Ridley breakout year, and I think he's absolutely going to ball out. And if you're able to get him at the beginning to mid fourth, where he's going right now, I mean, even on best ball 10s, he's wide receiver 14 at 39. So he's going right there, right at the beginning of the fourth over there. At that price, I'm definitely hammering that, and especially in a place like best ball, I would not mind doubling up and stacking those receivers. It's not something I'm too crazy about for redraft leagues, just because, in most situations, if Matt Ryan has a bad game, you're just completely screwed. Best ball, I'm more likely to do that. But is there anything else you wanted to add on and touch on with Calvin Ridley?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I think that we're right there, lockstep on that. So let's go to Amari Cooper, because I want you to tell me why. Like, I feel like I am right in line with Amari Cooper. I have him at what, wide receiver 14? Is it?
Tell me why.
Yeah, you have him at 14, and I have him at 8.
Yes. So, which is right in line with what his consensus ranking is, because he's going wide receiver 12 according to Fantasy Calculator. Wide receiver 13 is his consensus ranking. So I'm pretty much right there in line. You know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna start off and tell you why you're wrong. Because here's my issue with him. And like, I like Amari Cooper. I think he's fine, but I don't know. Again, ceiling wise, I don't know if it's how much of it's there. He had 7.4 targets per game, 20% target share, which was 35th in the league, I might add. 79 receptions, 1,200 yards, third in completed air yards, 8 touchdowns, 15.4 fantasy points per game, 15.1 yards per reception, 14th in yards per route, and 18th in fantasy points per target, and 14th in air yards. Now, if you look at him last year, he really started the year off hot, right? And then his fantasy production dipped in the second half of the season when Michael fucking Gallup emerged. From weeks 9 on, Michael Gallup outproduced him 15.3 fantasy points per game to 12.9 fantasy points per game for Cooper. Now, if you look at this offense was really good last year, especially their passing offense. Dak Prescott was a beast, and we both love Dak Prescott. I have Dak Prescott at QB3 this year, so I'm not expecting any sort of a drop off. I just don't know how much higher his ceiling can get. Maybe he gets a little bit more touchdowns, but yardage-wise, I don't see it going up much more. I don't think he's going to get many more targets. I don't think any of those things are really going to change, because Michael Gallup is still in that offense. They added CeeDee Lamb, Blake Jarwin, Ezekiel Elliott. There's a lot of guys here, and I don't think that Amari Cooper is going to command that kind of target share. So for me, I feel much more safer with taking him around there. I think he's a solid, even if you got him as your wide receiver 1, I'd feel fine with that. But I think he's a solid wide receiver 2. But let me rephrase it. I don't know if I really would want him as my wide receiver 1, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know if I would feel fantastic about it. I think he's another guy that's a little volatile on a week-to-week basis. And so for me, like, I like Amari Cooper, the player. And again, if he was going a little bit later in drafts, I may have a little bit more consideration. I don't hate where he's going, but all things considered, I just don't think the ceiling is there, he has a high enough ceiling for me. So I think he's a fine wide receiver 2.
The thing with Gallup coming on at the end of the year, we also have to keep in mind of how banged up Cooper was all year, right? He had the foot sprain the preseason. He had the ankle sprain. He had the quad issue. Then he had a knee sprain in week 10. So that was literally from the preseason until week 10. He was dealing with all those issues. I love Gallup. I'm not trying to take anything away from him there, but we've seen pretty consistently. I think he's gotten more willing to do so, but Dak is definitely a see it, throw it kind of quarterback. That's why at the beginning of his career, things didn't tend to work out with Dez, because at the end of Dez's career, he wasn't much of a separator. He was more of that throw up, contested catch kind of guy. And we've seen Dak is more, he would prefer to see the guy open first. And Amari Cooper is an absolute animal with his route running and his ability to get open and to create space for himself. So all with Lamb being added, does that bode well for him? Obviously not. We'd want to have basically just be Cooper and Gallup again. But I think Gallup will be absolutely fine. I think Dak is one of those guys that we see who can have that outside shot at a QB1 season. He's only been getting better since his rookie year, and I think that this could just be one of those instances where, with a fully healthy Amari Cooper, because if you look at you mentioned at the end of the year what happened with between Gallup and Cooper, I think that was more injury related than like talent related, right? If you look at what Cooper has actually performed better with Gallup on the field than whenever it's just been Cooper. So looking at the DLF player splits app, 23 games where they played together, 8 where it was just Cooper, 16 points with Gallup, PPR, his mean PPR points, and without Gallup, that drops down to 11.6. Now, again, obviously with Lamb, that's gonna change some things here as well. But that defense has lost a lot of pieces all across that defense. So I think we could see them throwing more. So would we want 140, 150 targets for Cooper? Absolutely. Last year, I think he was at like 119. I mean, if he gets up to 130-ish, 135, I don't think there's any reason why he couldn't be a back end wide receiver one for fantasy purposes. Wouldn't surprise me at all to see him more involved in the red zone as well. We've seen the offensive line kind of starting to fall to the wayside for Dallas, and that was one of their strengths with Zeke and Dak at the beginning of their careers. So I think the passing volume is going to go up in total. Yes, there are more pieces, but I think the kind of quarterback Dak is, he's a see a throw kind of guy, and that is definitely going to bode well for Amari Cooper and his ability with his route running and his ability to get open.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually went and looked real quick and I updated the fantasy football calculator. I don't hate where he's going. So right now he's going at 310. Like I don't really hate that. If you can get him in like late third, early fourth, I actually think that's a pretty solid spot for him. But that's wide receiver 12. The next two are Allen Robinson, Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, Robert Woods, that are all kind of going around him in that late third, early fourth. Juju Smith-Schuster, Odell is going right ahead of him. So I can tell you personally, I'd rather have Odell. I'd rather have Juju Smith-Schuster. I'd rather have Allen Robinson for sure, obviously. And I'd probably get to Cooper Kupp is probably where I would definitely rather have Amari Cooper than Cooper Kupp. And I'd probably rather have him than DJ Moore. So, I think it's a preference thing. Like I don't hate it's certainly something that we should be looking for is wide receivers and explosive offenses, which is something that Dallas provides. So I definitely can see the upside. I don't hate where I have him. I feel like I have him kind of right where he should be going. I just don't think he has, at least for me, there's no way I could feel like him putting him in like wide receiver 8, wide receiver 9. I just think those wide receivers have a little bit more upside than he does in that range. So yeah. Let's just jump to the last one, right? Let's jump to Odell, like who's tough because he's that guy that's tough. Is it a name? Am I still believing in his name, or does he still have it in the tank? He's 27 years old. Last year, he did play in all 16 games, though he was banged up. He played through a lot of injuries last year. The offense as a whole was awful. Baker Mayfield was terrible, but he still, 25.6% target share. He was second in deep targets, though his 12.6 fantasy points per game was 33rd. He finished with 74 receptions, just over 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns. But there's some positives here, though, because he was third in total air yards, and he accounted for 38% of the team's total air yards. So I think this offense takes a step forward. While I do agree that this team that wants to run the football, I do think that Baker Mayfield can take a step forward this year and be much more efficient now that Freddie Kitchens is gone. Stefanski's there. Now, I think this offense kind of trends forward and be a little bit closer to the offense that we were hoping it was going to be last year. Offseason reports that Odell has really bought into this scheme that Stefanski's bringing over here. So, with all those things considered, I think between him and Jarvis Landry, I think both of them are still going to eat. And then at tight end position, they brought in Austin Hooper. They still have David Njoku. I think they're going to be running some 12 personnel, but that doesn't really affect Odell Beckham. I think with Odell Beckham finally stay healthy, I definitely think he can still be that guy who averaged, almost 70 receptions, 6 receptions, 86 yards per game, which is what he did for while he was for his first 6 seasons in the league. I still think that guy is there. And I think this is one spot where last year he was going at wide receiver 6. Now you're getting him at a little bit of a discount. Like I said, going in late 3rd, early 4th round, depending on what people feel about him, because people aren't as high on him as they used to be. The excitement of him has worn off. But like I said, I still think that he can make up some of this stuff. I think I have him projected probably for around 1,200 yards and about 8 touchdowns. So I think that's well within the range of possibility. And so I have no problem with taking Odell, and he certainly has nuclear upside in him as well.
For sure, man. The reason why I had him ranked a little bit lower was just some of the questions. Like, does Stefanski actually want to run 12 personnel more, or was that a case of, Mike Zimmer more or less telling him what to do? There are just some questions with him that I don't have with some of the other guys ahead of him, where I feel more confident in the, or I feel there's like less questions. So, but dude, this was harder ranking these guys than what I thought it was going to be. You hit me up, what was that, Saturday night or something, asked if I had them done. I was like, oh, you know what, man, just give me a second. I'll get my top 12 done here. And, dude, then I started doing them. I was moving guys all the way up, all the way down. So, like, honestly, after that top 5, top 6 kind of range, there are so many guys that you can make a case for, basically going from 7 to, 16, 14 kind of range. But like I said, the reason why I just had him a little bit lower, I just had a couple more questions. Jarvis feels like, we talked about Marvin Jones being slept on as the secondary option to Kenny Golladay.
Jarvis Landry always is criminally undervalued every year.
Yeah. So he's someone else who I think can provide you that really nice value as the, what seems like the second option in that offense, but way more of a 1A, 1B kind of thing. So I had way more trouble with these rankings than I thought I was going to, and he was one of the ones who I also had issues with. I think I had him as high as like 9 or 10 at one point, then I dropped him down a little bit, and then ultimately he ended up at 16 for me. And I know I'm just going to end up going through and completely redoing all of these at some point between now and the beginning of the season. But Odell definitely has that massive upside if we see, if we get a little bit of a surprise from Stefanski and it's not that 12 personnel, maybe they run more 11, or the running game isn't the sole focus to the point that, to where we're all kind of making it out to be now. If they go a little bit more pass heavy, if Baker takes that step forward and we see more rookie year Baker than sophomore year Baker, that entire offense is obviously going to benefit from that. And Odell, I don't think he is just a name. I don't think we're holding him in that regard because of what he did in seasons past. I still think he has some in the tank. He played with that hernia injury all year last year, where I think they came out that it was either mid-season or toward the end of the year once, shit hit the fan in Cleveland, but basically came out and said that like Odell should have had this in the hernia surgery in the off season and it wouldn't have been an issue. So he still got to over 1,000 yards playing with the sports hernia injury. So like I said, he's someone who I had trouble ranking, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was a top 10 guy, and it also wouldn't surprise me if they do end up being the kind of offense in terms of what we've been projecting for them since the Stefanski hire. It wouldn't surprise me if he was more of like a mid wide receiver 2 option either. He's definitely someone who, if I had if I had a crystal ball or a time machine for fantasy purposes, I would love to see what his season looks like, week 16, week 17.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think the upside's certainly there, and that's what you're looking for. And once you get him now in the third round, some of that's been baked out of where he was going. So, I like Odell. So, one last thing I think we need to talk about before we skedaddle is we didn't bring up the big news of the Cam Newton signing. We've already obviously done our quarterback rankings. It's tough, right, with Cam Newton because now he signs with New England Patriots on a 1-year deal, and it's hard for me to imagine that he's not going to be the starting quarterback of the New England Patriots if he's healthy, because it's Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah.
And
I don't get all I don't get all this of like, hey, he hasn't been named the starter yet. Stop. He's gonna be the starter.
Yeah, like I can't imagine a scenario where Jarrett Stidham beats him out in camp. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it just ain't gonna happen. So for me, like if you look at Cam Newton when he's healthy, in terms of fantasy, like the dude's a baller. Like he's been, I think every year he's been healthy, he's been at least a top 5 quarterback in every single season. His rushing ability that he brings to the table, he has that Konami code in terms of being able to do that. He's like a tank out there. There is some question marks about his pass catches, but that's what he's always had in his career. Most of the time, his wide receivers have been Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess and guys like that. And I honestly think that we should probably be looking at somebody like N'Keal Harry a little bit differently now that they've brought in Cam Newton, right? N'Keal Harry was going out like wide receiver 60-something. Or 70 or something like that before this. Now, like I moved up N'Keal Harry to wide receiver, I think 40, 41, 42, something in that range. I moved up quite a bit because I do think that this is going to have a big impact on that offense. And I think that N'Keal Harry is kind of that perfect target for Cam Newton. So, like I said, I think this is a big boost to him. I think he's somebody that we have to wait and see kind of what his full injury report is because it sounds like he's healthy and he's been working out and everything else. And if that foot is good to go, like it's hard not to like New England in this offense.
I think you're right. The entire offense gets a bump. Fantasy Football Calculator has Harry at wide receiver 62 at 1409, and Best Ball 10 since yesterday. He is wide receiver 60. So I would definitely expect that to go up. Looking at the Best Ball 10's platform, some of the names going ahead of Harry right now: Deshaun Jackson, Curtis Samuel, Brashad Perriman, Sammy Watkins, Robbie Anderson, Justin Jefferson, Preston Williams, Golden Tate are some of the names going ahead of him. So I would definitely expect him to jump up a little bit. You're right. He hasn't been surrounded by top-notch talent, outside of McCaffrey really and Greg Olsen. But other than that, like he hasn't had like a star-studded cast of receivers anyway. So I think that like I said, the offense as a whole gets a bump, but I'm not sure how much higher I'm going to be taking those guys once I get to ranking them. Because I still think there are going to be some question marks, and like you said, the injury thing is the biggest thing, and that's why New England gave him the 1-year contract that was so incentive heavy. And I mean it's what you expect the Patriots to do anyway, right? Like they just sit there. The Bears go out and trade, what was it, like a third or a fourth for Nick Foles, and then the Patriots just come in and get Cam Newton for free. Rinse, wash, repeat. It's just what they do. So like I said, that.
Do you think now that they've added Cam Newton, do you think that they are a contender for? Do you think they're the favorites to win the AFC East now?
If that defense can be the defense of last year, for sure, I think that team is still going to ride on the defense. If that defense does what they've been doing for the past 2 seasons, then I think you kind of have to. Like it's so hard to doubt the Patriots, no matter how much we want to, no matter how much we think they're falling off or no more Brady now. Well, what do? They go out, they get Newton, completely revamps that entire offense. It has us talking completely differently about it. The the only real threat is the Bills, right? And the thing that's holding them back is Josh Allen. As good as he is for fantasy, would it surprise you if he was like if he was out by like before the end of his second contract in terms of, I mean, he just kind of is relegated to a backup quarterback role. I mean, that wouldn't surprise me at all. So I think that's obviously they're the only real threat to the Patriots. And if we can get, I mean, dude, honestly, if it's even 75-80% of Cam Newton, like, I think that's going to be good enough to float the rest of that offense.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the division, the Jets are obviously no shot. I do think the Dolphins take a big step forward this year. I think they're a much better team than they were last year. I don't know if they're good enough to contend for the AFC East this year, but they're certainly heading in the right direction. With all the moves that they made over the offseason and all the draft picks that they have. But yeah, I mean, I think it still comes down to New England and the Bills, and how much can you trust Josh Allen? But this Cam Newton signing, if Cam Newton returns and he is the Cam Newton that we know, like, I think this was kind of a typical Patriots move, right? Everybody thinks the Patriots are dead in the water, they're done, and then they go out and just out of nowhere on a Sunday afternoon, everyone's chilling, having a good time, and you got Adam Schefter out here dropping bombs on you on a Sunday afternoon that Cam Newton signs with the Patriots. So it will be interesting to see how he fits in because, Cam Newton's got all that swagger, that bravado, and everything else, showing up to press conferences, wearing I don't know what, something that I could never pull off for sure. But I mean, he definitely can. But it's going to be interesting to see how the Patriots, because the Patriots, the Patriots way, you're not supposed to really stand out or anything like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how Cam Newton shows up and kind of fits into that.
Dude, the edit of Bill Belichick's face on Cam Newton with the scarf is dude, Twitter and the internet will remain undefeated. The fact that someone pulls stuff out like that so quickly it's like, dude, that was by far the best one with like the little scarf wrapped around his head. Dude, that was that was so good. But just real quick, Miami Dolphins, according to the FanDuel Sportsbook, their over-under on the year is 6. And the Buffalo Bills are sitting at, I think it was 8.5. Yeah, they're sitting at 8.5. The Jets are at 6.5. And the Patriots are up to 9.5. I'm not sure where they were pre-Cam, but I can't imagine they were at 9.5, right?
I think they were. I was surprised when I saw I think I saw it like maybe last week or something like that. I was surprised of how high that total was for them. So yeah, like I think Vegas still believes. I mean, this defense is still largely intact. They lost a couple of pieces in Kyle Van Noy and a couple other pieces on that defense, but I still intact. I mean, their secondary is still coming back, which was one of the biggest strengths. So yeah, I think that defense is still really good. So it's gonna be fun to watch Cam Newton on the Patriots, though. I do know that.
Yeah, like you said, the whole dynamic of the Patriot way and what Cam has been largely his entire career will definitely be a fun watch. And now we have another offense that we are intrigued in for fantasy purposes. So make sure you guys stick in here, stay tuned, stay sticked in, stay stuck, as I think they say. We'll definitely be making sure that we're hitting you guys with all the relevant content with everything that's going on. Be sure to leave the rate and reviews, everything. But more importantly, we want to see need to make sure I take a little pause here and say this all at once so it doesn't sound as bad as it just went through in my head right before I say it. Hit us with your hashtag nuts on the table takes for the wide receiver position. Let us know who your bold call is to finish the year with a wide receiver 1. And like I said, we really appreciate all you guys rocking with us and hitting us with the rate and reviews and subscribes and everything else. So that'll wrap it up for this episode. You can find me on Twitter at @CKutzerFF. You can find Kevin on Twitter at FantasyRath13. We will be back with you guys on Wednesday as we go through wide receivers 13 to 24 and give you guys some deep targets. So until then, we will see you guys later.